Red Sox Spring Training is going to be absolutely fascinating this year. This is everything you're going to need to know going into it. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Red Sea Radio. My name is Corbin, and believe it or not, baseball is back. Kind of, right? Red Sox pitchers and catchers are due to report tomorrow, although most of them, to be honest with you, are already down in Fort Myers starting to get their work in. Brian Bayo's been down there since winter weekend. He's been grinding, and baseball is back. For the Red Sox, this offseason has felt like a long, terrible journey, but we've made it back to Red Sox baseball, and I can't help but get a little bit excited, right? Regardless of how you feel about the team right now, seeing Red Sox players start to get back into baseball activities is an exciting feeling. This spring training in particular is going to have a ton of different storylines, both on the field and off the field, regarding the shape and roster and success of the 2024 Red Sox. There's going to be a whole lot to pay attention to. It can get confusing, which is why in today's video, we're going to be breaking down every storyline you need to be paying attention to for the 2024 spring training and how it could affect the 2024 season. But before we get into that, we are on the road to 10,000 subscribers. We are less than 800 subscribers away. So if you want to help us get there and you're new here, do me a favor. Make sure you guys have hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We talk Red Sox content almost every single day. Also, make sure you guys have hit the like button on this video as well. Helps these videos out a ton, and it would mean a lot to me. Thank you all very much for clicking on this one. Let's get into it. The first, most obvious, and probably the most important thing to pay attention to over the next coming weeks is how the Red Sox actually end up polishing off this roster. Believe it or not, going into spring training this year, there's actually still quite a few impactful free agents left on the open market, and there's also a few trade rumors floating around as well. I'm talking about a very handsome left-handed starter still available on the open market. The question is, are the Red Sox complacent in what their roster looks like going into 2024, or are they still looking to add/subtract? My gut is telling me there's still going to be a couple of moves left for the Boston Red Sox this offseason. However, I don't really know what the impact of those moves are actually going to look like. Are they going to be very similar to what we've seen this offseason, which is short-term contracts that have a marginally positive impact on the Red Sox, or do they bend a little bit and get a bit desperate and take a risk, bring someone in that's going to be a legitimate impact player? I would guess it's probably the first one, but they've surprised us before, and that's something that they're going to have to figure out in the coming days/weeks, as they're going to want these players to get as full of a spring training as humanly possible, especially if you're going to give them a decent amount of money so that they're ready to go for the regular season. This is by far and away the biggest storyline left with the Boston Red Sox this spring training, but there's definitely more, and a lot of that is concerning the actual roster itself right now. One of the more underrated situations going into spring training is what their catching tandem ends up looking like. This offseason, the Red Sox picked up a multitude of minor league catchers that have the potential to be major league catchers. The two most notable being Roberto Perez and Tyler Heineman. Heineman already being on that 40-man roster. Shout out to Ed Hand for this graphic that's on the screen now. He put this up on Twitter, but there are a couple of really interesting non-roster invitees on this catching list, including Nathan Hickey, who's your second highest ranked catching prospect. I'm super curious to see if the Red Sox go for the favorite here and just keep Wong and McGuire as the tandem going into 2024, or if they feel as though they now have enough depth to switch it up a bit, specifically with Reese McGuire. I could see them possibly making a move to have switch hitting Heineman, who's also a solid defender, take over that sort of backup spot from Reese McGuire if they aren't fully satisfied with Reese's improvements. I still think having Wong and Reese is the favorite to go into the regular season, but I also wouldn't be surprised if we see a little bit of shakeup at the catcher position, especially with Kyle Teel sort of shooting up through the minor leagues. They might make a quick adjustment and sort of become a placeholder for Kyle Teel. I also think it's going to be important to see how they work with minor league pitchers. We've talked about it this offseason, but the Red Sox weren't really satisfied with the way pitchers were performing in AAA. The reason they picked up so many defensive catchers is to help with that. It's going to be interesting to see sort of who catches who this spring training and what that mix looks like going into 2024. One of the bigger storylines, something that's going to be all over the place, is the health of the team. It's the storyline going into every season. Who's healthy? Who's going to miss a couple of games going into the 2024 season? It happens every year, but more specifically, when we're talking about health, how do some of the players that are coming off not healthy seasons look like going into 2024? I think the biggest one on this list is Trevor Story, who had a very not healthy 23, having his first really fully healthy offseason and sort of stepping into a major role with the Boston Red Sox. Is this something that he is ready to go from day one? Is this something where it's going to take a little bit for him to ramp up? Is he going to be fully healthy and ready to go going into the 2024 season? But it's not just him. Positional player-wise, you've got Tyler O'Neill, who's coming off of an unhealthy season, is probably in the same boat as Trevor Story going into a healthy offseason. Masataka Yoshida had his fatigue issues, which really isn't the same thing and probably something we won't get an answer to right away. But how does he look like with a full spring training, not having to play in the WBC? Pitching wise, it's sort of a similar situation. Last year, you had a ton of injuries going into the 2023 season. The biggest ones, in my opinion, to pay attention to are Tanner Houck and Garrett Whitlock, mostly because they both dealt with injuries in 23. They're both going to be impactful players in 2024. Regardless of what their role is, they're going to be important to the success of the Boston Red Sox. What do they look like? Do they look fully healthy? Do they look like they battled back from whatever injuries that were plaguing them during the 2023 season? Garrett Whitlock, I know, already added 20 pounds of straight muscle this offseason, which doesn't really have anything to do with his injury history, but you can now add him to the Red Sox all bicep team, which they're slowly putting together. So overall, I think looking at just the health of the Boston Red Sox going into 24 is going to be super important, and we're going to get our first glimpse of that over the coming weeks. And speaking of pitching, we have to talk about the Red Sox big acquisition here in Lucas Giolito. Lucas Giolito had a fantastic start to the 2023 season, but once he got traded and was starting to deal with some off-field issues, those statistics really took a nosedive and he ended up finishing off the year in really poor status. The big question surrounding him is, can he get back to what he was in the first half of 23 and the last couple of years? Can he get back to that status? We're going to see over the next couple of weeks, is it something that could have been immediately fixed as just a change of scenery put him back into the mindset that he had over the last couple of years? Is this something that he needs to deal with over the course of spring training as he gets closer to opening day? Is it even possible for him to get back to where he was? This is a big question mark for the Red Sox and a really important one, and my hope/belief is that we see a bit of a combination of he's completely changed, ready to go, and he's still working on things, because that would be ideal. So by the time he gets to opening day, he's fully ready and good to go to be sort of an X factor in the Red Sox rotation. That's sort of the hope. And we've already talked about catching depth and the situation there, but what about depth within the rest of the Red Sox roster? Right now, there's a ton of room for these depth pieces on the 26-man roster. One of the biggest questions is who's going to back up first base. Obviously, Tristan Casas is your first baseman, but if he needs days off or he ends up, swear to God, if this happens, I will cry, he gets injured, who's going to be able to man that position? Right now, based on the 26-man roster, it looks like it's a combination of Ref Snyder and Pablo Reyes, who do have some experience over there, but is there room for anyone else? Bobby Dahlbeck is a name to pay attention to. If the Red Sox aren't going to bring in another right-handed bat or someone else who can play first base, Bobby may be a legitimate option. He could play both first and third. He's a guy who does have some power in his bat. Does he get the opportunity to sort of end up being the right-handed power bat option off the bench for the Boston Red Sox? The middle infield's another really interesting one. Right now, it feels pretty safe to say Pablo and Emmanuel Valdez are going to be your middle infield depth going into the 2024 season. But again, taking a look at Ed Hand's really well done roster graphic here, there's a lot of non-roster invitees on this list, including Alex Rodriguez's nephew and one of your top prospects in Nick York. Do any of these guys get the opportunity to try and beat out some of these players for a middle infield position? The outfield feels sort of set in stone a little bit, right? It's most likely going to be Duran in center, Abreu in right, and Masataka Yoshida in left. But what does the depth look like in the outfield? Is Tyler O'Neill playing mostly center field? Is he splitting time with Massa in left field and having Massa play mostly DH? Or are Duran and Abreu rotating between left field and Tyler O'Neill's mostly manning right field and center field? How do they utilize O'Neill as the depth piece for the Red Sox going into 2024? To me, that that'll be absolutely fascinating. After that, we got another storyline of just the young guys in general. What do they look like either coming into their first full season in a Red Sox uniform or their second full season in a Red Sox uniform or coming off of a breakout year? Offensively, this is, in my opinion, the biggest question mark going into the 2024 season. In spring training right away, do these guys look like they took a step up? Do they look like they took a step back? Or is this something we're going to have to wait and see on? Offensively, you're talking about guys like Duran, Casas, Abreu, Vaughn Grissom, a newcomer who really hasn't had a ton of time in Major League Baseball. Pitching-wise, it's a very similar situation. Cutter Crawford, after his breakout season, how does he look? Brian Bayo, is he going to take a step up and be that frontline starter the Red Sox at this point need him to be? Josh Winkowski, after a successful bullpen season, are they going to actually stretch him out to be a starter? Is he going to get an opportunity to win a starting job? There are a ton of question marks surrounding the young players on this team that I think we will get some answers to as we get towards the end of spring training or even at the beginning of spring training where guys are starting to play in games. Another storyline, there are a ton. Like I said, there's a lot to pay attention to this spring. What does the immediate impact of the new coach look like? Andrew Bailey was really highly regarded when he was hired by the Red Sox, and honestly, there's a lot of pressure on him to turn some of these young players around. The Red Sox have a whole lot of young pitching talent that has been sort of underwhelming since they've gotten to the major leagues. We've seen spurts of them being absolutely electric, but it hasn't been sustainable over the course of a 162-game season. Does a new philosophy with Andrew Bailey affect that at all? Can Andrew Bailey get some of these players, these Houks, Whitlocks, Cutters, Bayos, to their next level? Does his philosophy play in Boston? This is going to be a massive question going into 2024. Is this something that we see an immediate impact of? Is this something we're going to have to wait and see over a long period of time, whether or not it actually is sustainable? I think it's going to be a mix of both. They've been clearly working with pitchers this entire offseason. When we talked to Hunter Dobbins, he talked about the fact that Craig Breslow, the driveline guy, have already placed new workouts and things to focus on with these young players. Is this something that's going to correlate well to Major League Baseball? And again, I think this is something like we sort of talked about with Massa that we're not going to see the full effects of until we get to the regular season, but we'll at least get our first glimpse of how these changes affect the Red Sox over the next few weeks. There are going to be a ton of positional battles this offseason in terms of spring training, but I think the biggest one to pay attention to will be how the Red Sox pitching staff actually shapes up. You've got the competition for the rotation. Guys like Houck, Whitlock, Cooper Criswell, and Josh Winkowski have all been stretched out and are going to be fighting for that number 5 spot. But I think more importantly is going to be, what does the bullpen end up looking like? Obviously, all of those guys can end up in the rotation. Probably only one of them does. So you're going to be kicking the rest of them to the bullpen. You've got guys like Chris Murphy and Brandon Walter who could possibly be in very important roles in the bullpen. How did they work out? Are they going to be battling against each other with Lucas, who was just picked up, a 37-year-old veteran reliever from the left-hand side? Do those guys battle it out for one positional spot in the bullpen? Then you've got all of the non-roster invitees, the young veteran people who have been in the bullpen before but need to re-earn their spot in the bullpen. This is going to be a massive battle throughout the entirety of 2024. And it really is almost every single year a battle for the bullpen, especially those last roster spots, because the bullpen can be so interchangeable. But I think this year is going to be absolutely fascinating in terms of actual battles going into 2024. And something to really pay attention to this spring is how players are utilized out of the bullpen, who performs really well, who earns themselves a spot on the 26-man roster. Just like the offseason, and most likely just like this year's regular season, there's going to be a lot of questions this spring training that the Red Sox are going to need answers to. Whether or not they actually get those answers in the short period of time spring training goes on is the bigger question. And I know as fans, we have not been happy with this offseason, and we don't love the fact that there are so many question marks going into the 2024 season, but at the very least, it's going to make this spring training extremely interesting. Let me know in the comment section down below, which one are you paying attention to? Is it something that I mentioned in this video? Is there another storyline that I did not mention that you're going to keep a close eye on? And what do you think of all these questions going into a 2024 spring training where there's a ton of questions already? Let me know all your thoughts on the biggest storylines of the 2024 spring training in the comment section down below. As always, if you made it to the end of this video, do me a favor. Make sure you guys have hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you're new here, we talk Red Sox content almost every single day. Also, make sure you guys have hit the like button on this video as well. Just helps these videos out a ton, and it would mean a lot to me. Thank you all very much for clicking on this one, and I will see you in the red seats.